Next, I'd like to invite our panelists on stage for the panel conversation. We have 5 panelists in total. So starting with Jaume Sanpera, who's the founder and CEO of Satellite IoT. We have Biju Nair, who's the EVP and President of Assurance Global Connected Living Business Unit. We have Gavin Williams, who's the Chief Development and Regional Officer at NBN Australia. We have Jamie Zimmerman, who is the Deputy Director of Digital Connectivity, Gender Impact Accelerators, and Gender Equity Division at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then finally, we have Samir, I'm going to get this wrong, Viyuru. Okay, he's currently the head of WW Business Development for Communication Services Providers at AWS. Welcome, everyone. Great, so to kick us off, I'm going to ask a question to you, Jamie. And my first question is, what is the value of 5G over connectivity? You know, we heard that 55% of the global population is connected. However, if we look at the low-income groups, 94% of the unconnected live in those countries. What are the benefits of bringing 5G to this group? What are they missing out on?
Yeah, thanks, Mandisa. And of course, being a representative of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, our role as a philanthropy is to ensure that everyone has the chance to live a healthy and productive life. And the things that make our lives, all of our lives, healthy and productive, more and more require 5G connectivity. We rely on it, we benefit from it. And so the question, what are people missing out on that are not connected right now? What are the benefits to them? They're the same benefits. They could and should be the same benefits to everyone that we enjoy on a day-to-day basis. We want fast, reliable services. We want access to information. We want products and services. We want to be able to educate our children online during a pandemic or continue to run our small businesses. These are all the same use cases, same needs that we have in high-income countries, low and middle and income countries as well, even in the lower developing countries. And I'm looking at kind of standard definitions, indicators of meaningful connectivity that 5G provides. Safe, secure, productive, and enriching. And right now, I think what we're seeing is not just a digital divide between rural and urban, rich and poor, men and women, but we're seeing that connectivity divide, the quality of connectivity, that divide increasing so much that we're risking creating chasms. And I think that should worry all of us to look and say, okay, 5G will be for some for a little while, it'll be far out before it gets to everyone else, and what it will take to catch the rest of the world up and what benefit they will lose out on while the rest of us are spiraling into the digital future in the fourth industrial revolution is a recipe, in my view, for not just exacerbated poverty and lack of opportunity for those who are already excluded or underconnected, but it also is a recipe for fragility in an ever-increasing fragile world. And so, I think the question of is 5G for everyone, I would say, if I could be so bold to start off the panel, my remarks by challenging the organizers, is really to say, what is it going to take to make it for everyone? Not a yes or no question. This is a yes and when, and how fast can we get there?
Thanks, Jamie. Gavin, this one is directed at you. A lot of emerging market operators that I work with are still migrating customers from 3G to 4G. And the business case for 4G is much more attractive for them, both the operator and the consumer. And so the question for you is, do we prioritize getting people connected over the innovation barrier? How does NBN think about this?
Well, so we're now rolling out millimetre wave 5G, and that's going to do tremendous things by enabling us to push our 4G holdings much harder. We think about digital inclusion as covering. Digital inclusion has a broader context and connectivity, so we think about it in terms of access to broadband, affordable access to broadband, and then the digital ability that comes with that. Look, I think you can do a lot with 4G. And if you think about the penetration of devices that aren't yet 5G capable, the cost points on network build that are at scale with 4G, the ease with which you can upgrade 4G networks, in our case to millimetre wave non-standalone, I think that's the place to start. And we've seen as the NBN rolled out, we were able to see what we call the NBN effect from where NBN rolled out. It coincided with a census, so NBN areas and non-NBN areas. And the NBN effect was quite profound in terms of the economic outcomes in particular for numbers of businesses created. We found, for example, that work from home businesses led by females, there was a 23 times greater effect in areas where that had broadband connectivity than where there wasn't. So, and then the snowball effect builds the business case, enables much more in terms of ongoing investment.
Great, thanks for that. Gavin, if we get a bit more tactical, I'd like to understand, maybe from you, Samir, what are some of the 5G use cases that you're very excited about, but also ones that actually do bridge the digital divide?
Thank you, Mandisa. First of all, Jamie, I completely agree with you that all of us, need to make sure that every child, every person in every region on Earth has access to the best connectivity available, because it is a matter of bridging the educational divide. Mm-hmm. It is a matter of bridging the digital divide, the skills divide, and it will create a better quality of life for everybody, no matter where they are or what they do. So with that lens, let me talk about a few of the things that we're seeing from the telco customers that we serve, right? And how we're enabling that, right? Mm. Where I live in California, a third of the population, believe it or not, is still in the digital divide world, where they do not have adequate broadband coverage in schools, along transport corridors, in farms. Mm. Right? There's a lot of farm workers out there. And so we've been working, for example, with the California state to go build private networks that are built on the cloud, no upfront investment, pay-as-you-go model, right, which is all the benefits of the cloud, and starting to light up these communities that have historically not had any broadband coverage with private 5G today. Right, so that is just one use case. And what makes this possible is, when the 5G standards were defined as cloud native, you can actually, these functions that make up the network, you can now actually dynamically shrink them mm-hmm. and scale them. And because the big network that is deployed in a metro like New York City to serve millions of people, can also scale down to serve the 100-person village, as long as there is connectivity and an edge cloud, which is what we do. You can actually go bridge that divide without any additional investment, zero capex.
Great. And maybe a similar question to you, Biju and Jaume. Which use cases are you excited about, and how do you see them bridge the digital divide? Maybe you start with you, Biju.
With me? Okay. Thank you, Mandisa, and thank you, GSMA, for hosting this session. When I first heard the question, is 5G future for everybody, my initial instinct was, let me ask ChatGPT. But I decided against that and said, there's enough people on the panel and we can discuss that. I completely agree with what both Jamie and Samir said about the social need for connectivity. And obviously, my other colleagues will talk about the infrastructure, and we heard from the speakers earlier about the infrastructure deployment of what's happening to bring connectivity to space. But all of that amounts to nothing if you don't have access to devices that can actually connect consumers. And if you think about if you look at the numbers, the number one reason that customers say that they have not been able to buy a smartphone, it's been the cost and the availability of those devices in specific markets, particularly emerging markets and things like that. So what we end up doing in our business at Assurant is we repurpose devices. And so as customers are upgrading from 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G, these are expensive devices to start with, but as consumers are upgrading, we allow them to trade in their old phones, just like with cars. People don't buy a car and keep their old car for the most part. People do trade it in, and of course, different scale of cost. And what we end up doing with those older devices is make sure that they're being made available to other markets where people can close that digital divide and get access to it. It may be initially 4G devices that customers are upgrading, because 5G penetration globally is somewhere between 13 to 18%. So it's still coming up to speed, but all of the deployment costs and everything starts to become not that viable if you can't find the devices and give people access to that. The second aspect of it is the cost of network operations, right? Any mobile operator here will tell you 5G networks cost 10 times cheaper to operate than a 4G network. And lastly, what I want to touch about is when we are upgrading these devices and making them available across the globe, we are also helping sustainability. Because in many countries, as people are upgrading from 2G to 3G or 3G to 4G, what do you do with these old devices? Throw them in a drawer and never use them again, and ultimately dispose them irresponsibly, so that ends up polluting the water, polluting the air, polluting the soil, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a win-win-win type of scheme that closes the digital gap, helps the environment, and helps mobile operators upgrade to newer devices.
Yeah, which is a great use case. I mean, we know one of the biggest barriers is device affordability. But Jaume, do you want to speak about some use cases maybe related more to infrastructure and things that you may be excited about in that space?
We have seen an amazing bunch of new applications when you deliver, because when you talk about digital divide, okay, a 500 euros device does not solve it, because it's not usable for most of the people that live in these rural places. Then when we address this market using exactly the same standard $5 device, we see applications in agriculture with 15 to 20% productivity increase, or with cattle management that we see a reduction of more than a quarter of cow loss due to health problems. Then all this, it's happening today in all these places, and the digital inclusion, it goes through the standards. This is the only way, okay, that we could solve all these 3 billion people unconnected, okay, that we all know that exist, okay, that we have to find solutions that really address the problems from the cost structure, from the cost perspective, and also from the connectivity.
Yeah, and maybe if I stay with you, Jaume, for a second, is what is the role that you see satellite technology playing in mobile connectivity, especially in rural areas? Do you see it as a complement to 5G? And I think in addition, it would be good to understand the partnership opportunities that you also see with MNOs when it comes to LEO satellites.
Since today, the satellite industry has been working with proprietary devices. This means, okay, that they have no economies of scale, they are super expensive. And this was a solution. With these devices, you have connectivity everywhere in the world. Last June was approved the new release of the 3GPP standard, the release 17. This means that exactly the same devices that today we are using inside the cities will be used with our satellite constellation outside the cities. This is a trend, okay? I'm sure that all you have been have noticed, okay, that much more satellite companies have been this year in the Mobile World Congress. This is because the satellite industry and the mobile industry are converging in one. Yep. 5G IoT is the first step forward. 5G new radio will be the second one, but 6G will be fully terrestrial and non-terrestrial technology. This means that both the terrestrial technology and the satellite technology will be integrated in one. it makes no sense to use satellite technology inside the cities, as well it makes no sense to deploy terrestrial infrastructure where there is low density.
Yeah. And maybe for you, Gavin, what's the role of fixed wireless? And do you think the industry is doing enough to support the fixed wireless use cases? What are you doing at NBN?
Yeah, so NBN is we're a wholesale-only broadband, layer 2 broadband provider. And fixed wireless is one of our services. We have fixed wireless footprint of about 220,000 square kilometres. That's about the size of Great Britain. What millimetre wave 5G deployment's enabling us to do is absolutely transform our proposition in terms of speed and capacity. In fact, we've just announced a couple of hours ago with our network partner Ericsson, the first commercial release of long-range millimetre wave getting to 6.9 kilometres from our tower. What that does is enable us to deload our centimetre wave properties and then push them further to lift the speed capability, but also push the geographic boundary by about another further 50%, which eats into what would otherwise be country that we cover with satellite technology. Ergo, the digital capability, the access capability for everyone in that footprint, and in fact, there's a benefit for our satellite customers too, because it's deloaded the satellite network. It enabled us to go to our government with a proposition they could afford by virtue of unlocking that massive capacity dividend of millimetre wave. But the fixed wireless use case is quite specific, and we've needed to do some different things with our vendors and partners, and they include the tuning of massive MIMO antenna. We've needed to focus on that. It's a very different kind of application to people, streaming through on a truck versus static points. And then I think that the fundamental to all of this is getting to the right cost point where 5G can be deployed both in first world countries and beyond. And we have not yet seen that step change in demand from operators and that step change in cost point from vendors to enable that, what I'd say, sort of a transformational shift in deployment.
Yeah. And if we shift gears maybe for a little bit, we've spoken a lot about B2C. There's also B2B use cases and opportunities. I personally believe that 5G B2B use cases are doing a lot more, at least from what I've seen in bridging the divide. But I'd love to hear from you, Samir, what use cases are you seeing here across different industries that you're excited about in B2B?
Yeah, so on 5G in the B2B world, we have deployed roughly 250 to 300 private networks purely serving the B2B domain. And here's where we're seeing the largest impact of these. The state and local government and education area has been a massive adopter. Multiple universities in the United States and overseas. Right? Mining, agriculture, and manufacturing have been high velocity verticals for us in this space. But in the terms of actually bridging this divide and bringing 5G to everyone, I was just talking with an operator today who's a customer and a partner of ours, who is building a private network the size of Spain to serve mining operations. So there's only a few countries that do that, obviously. So the ability to do worker safety where it wasn't available before, the ability to deploy the applications that provide those safety rails so that people can work safely, and complementing it with something like Kuiper or something like Satellite IoT, who's a partner of ours as well, in terms of providing the backhaul for mobile networks so that you can go reach previously unserved areas very, very easily and quickly with no upfront investment, pay-as-you-go model, the ability to scale up and down, and lower total cost of operations. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
But there's multiple industries adopting the private networks,
Yeah.
and I think we'll see a lot more
Yeah.
going forward.
Gavin, can you speak a bit about what you're seeing in the agriculture space specifically as examples in B2B in Australia?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, Australia's a big place, 7.7 million square kilometres. I think if you're a city slicker and you think about some of the applications you take for granted, like working from home and having a reliable Zoom capability, that kind of thing, some of the critical enablers that 5G unlocks are actually not terribly exotic kind of applications. So I think the consequence of having reliable access to those kind of capabilities means that, if you're First Nations community, you can access specialists in town for medical care or access remote university kind of services. In the case of agriculture, it's absolutely critical that the network capability can deliver underpin the kind of productivity improvements, the time savings for farmers, decision-making support, yield improvements that come from digitally enabled agriculture. And we've, a study that we conducted estimated a 5.6 billion opportunity, which is a lot of money in our parlance as we head towards $100 billion farm gate output by 2030, which is our aspiration. So 15.6%, analogous to the point I think that Jaume made earlier before. Absolutely imperative that you have connected farms, connected farm machinery, and decision support for farmers.
Right. Jaume, I know you and I also spoke about some use cases in education and B2B specifically. Any areas you'd like to touch on?
Yes, of course. So I do not discover anything, okay, if I say the access to information is the base to education and to open new opportunities. My last company, we connect more than 6,000 schools in Morocco through broadband, and the opportunities that were open for the people were amazing, okay. The standard 5G new radio will allow exactly that in a much lower cost direct to device. And this is where the revolution starts.
Yeah. Great, and maybe if we go more to the small, medium business ecosystem specifically, are there any pain points for that group that we think 5G could address, Jamie, in the markets that you work in? And if you think about gender and women who are also leading those small to medium business enterprises, what could 5G address for them specifically?
Yeah, of course. When I think about small and medium enterprises, I'm thinking about the women-owned, tiny, sometimes informal, on their way to formal business, looking for growth. And there are hundreds of millions of them in sub-Saharan Africa alone, probably billions around the world. And I think these are the women who are both entrepreneurial, but are also the most mobility constrained, time constrained, resource constrained. And so anything that improves their efficiency and productivity, smooths transactions, reduces friction, is going to help them. So 5G, the access to information, business information, market information, absolutely, but also real-time payment services, being able to reliably both make transactions within the supply chain, but also to receive payments digitally, which doesn't require necessarily a 5G network, but to make it reliable, fast, to really ensure that that use case is as strong as possible, would require the same quality of connectivity. I would imagine that our small businesses in the United States and Australia and everywhere else would also expect. So I think that a lot of the efficiencies in the business itself, but also connection to supply chain, and ultimately that opportunity to really have an entry point into the digital economy. And it's the digital economy that will, I think, as the small, medium enterprises will have the biggest opportunity for growth, and where we would want to see no women left behind. And so I think without that really strong connectivity for those small and medium enterprises, it'll be really difficult for them to engage in that level of e-commerce that would make them as productive and competitive within local as well as cross-border supply chains, which is ultimately largely the aspiration.
Yep. And maybe a last question for each of you. There's a partner I used to work with who used to say, if you were king for a day, how would you like to see
queen.
things happen? So if each of you were king for a day and we walk out of this session, what are the 3 things that you would like to see change in the industry to accelerate 5G adoption and really make it a future for everyone? If we try first. Or Biju wants to go first.
Oh, I'm either way. Well, boy, if I were king for a day, I think we talked about closing the digital divide and the role of devices in being able to close the digital divide. So if I were king for a day, I would almost mandate that when you are upgrading to a device, and specifically in the developed economies, you must trade in your older handset, because the benefits related to the ecosystem that happens, it's good for the mobile operators, it's good for the retailers, because they get the customers to come in. This device ends up benefiting somebody in another part of the world who otherwise would not have access to either just basic connectivity or even advanced connectivity with better devices, providing better healthcare, education, et cetera, and ultimately the benefit it brings to the environment is just unbelievable. It's millions and millions of tons of e-waste being eliminated from the earth.
Yeah.
I would say forget about proprietary devices, okay? That allows lock-ins for the operators. Something that, of course, it's common on the mobile industry, but is absolutely a must for the satellite industry in order to reach all these rural areas with a standard low-cost devices for everyone.
Yeah.
For me, I'm a believer that for full effectiveness, you need wirelessly enabled communities to operate as closely as possible to the most technologically advanced cities to enable an equalisation of access to market, sort of thing Jamie spoke about. So wireless technology, whether it's mobile or fixed wireless, is going to be fundamental to access capacity through 5G, through 6G, to keep that going. So my magic wand would build that ecosystem of the willing to really push that use case for a sustainable, cost-effective deployment of millimetre wave, long-range millimetre wave, moving to some of the new frequencies that we're looking at for 6G, so that we can have a really cost-effective and sustainable outlook for these communities.
All right, yeah, if I were queen for a day, thank you very much. Yeah, so not an expert in 5G, but I think just picking up on the point about the ecosystem, I think the way that the conversation started with the presentations, it was a lot about, okay, we'll start here and then we'll have some trickle-down connectivity that will happen, and eventually everyone will get there, and maybe that's the reality that we're in now, but if I can be expansive and imagine myself as a queen, I would love to see that turn on its head and say, we're going to start with the hardest problems first, and through the ecosystem and all hands on deck, mission-critical approach to say, we're not going to have it in the high-income areas till we figure out how we also have it in the low-income areas. And so what would that mean? What would it take? What kind of investment would be required? That's very pie in the sky. And I also believe that if we are going to bridge that chasm, it's going to require us looking at the hardest problems and solving them, and not waiting till we get to the low-hanging fruit first.
Yeah.
Could I be a mass hypnotist instead of a king? Because I think we've tried that for 2 millennia, and I don't think it really worked. So,
No comment.
so if I had an hour slot on national TV
Yeah.
with a hypnotic voice, the only thing I'd ask for is common sense regulations across the world, right? these regulations are real impacts to the scalability of one solution across borders, within the borders, across economic divides, across educational divides. So let's get all the regulators in one room. Let's hypnotize them into, the least regulated, but common sense regulated environment, so that the real power of 5G can just scale infinitely.
Great. I think we've come to the end. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.